Hello and thank you for coming. We'll talk about Gridsome today, which is a static sites generator for Vue.js. But notice that there are 4 Vue.js talks today on JNation, but none of those talks actually talks about Vue itself. We are discussing tooling, the ecosystem around the framework, but not the features of Vue or the future of Vue. So originally I wanted to talk about it a little, about the modular architecture that is used in all the tools that we saw today and how those tools together affect the general developer experience when you work with Vue.js. But, and I wanted to include something about the future of Vue.js because we're currently working on Vue.js 3, but then I realized that I'm stupid. Because I specifically asked for the shortest 15-minute slot, so I don't have time for any of that. But all of us, all the 4 of us, will be staying until the end of the conference. So if you have anything related to Vue.js to discuss or just want to talk with us, feel free to approach us. We are here for you. Okay, 14 minutes left. Let's waste another minute for self-introduction. My name is Dariusz Wędrychowski, but friends call me Gusto because it's much shorter. So feel free to call me that way. I'm a member of Vue.js core team, mostly doing community management, reaching out to library authors, content creators, event organizers, and new users. If some of you pick up Vue.js after today's conference, there's a chance we'll work together. And my main aim, my main goal in the core team is to make sure that everybody is having a good fun. You can find me on Twitter and the official Vue.js chat, which is the best starting point for Vue.js developers. Gridsome, as a static size generator, is obviously inspired by Gatsby, a highly popular tool for React. How many of you use Gatsby? Yeah, highly popular React. Gatsby got so good and because they focused on one single responsibility, which allowed them to optimize both the developer experience about their platform and the performance for the exact use cases they had. Just for this one task, generating static sites so they can be used for websites. They also provided a plugin system that got crazy popular. There are countless plugins for Gatsby. And it grew to the point in which we can practically connect every data source to Gatsby and manage it with GraphQL, which was a brave but also very good decision. A lot of developers decided to use Gatsby specifically for that fact. Now, there are also many projects that try to repeat their success. And in Vue ecosystem, the one closest to take the cake is Gridsome. It's well-maintained, got a growing community, which makes writing the plugins, the integrations for CMSs, for data sources, and making the learning materials much easier. But it still needs more exposure, and that's why I'm here today with you. So what's the deal with static site generators? In a typical modern front-end approach, we create single-page applications, and the HTML is generated in the browser based on the data coming from the server via API. Naturally, it's got both good and bad sides. One of the ways to deal with those bad sides is to use server-side rendering. This time with SSR, the initial HTML gets generated at the request time at the server and sent to the client as file or data. If we use JavaScript, or the next request after the initial request can again just connect to API as usually in single-page applications. So it's a very handy solution. Finally, we have the static site generators. The difference here is that static site generators generate the HTML at the build time. And this HTML or the data is saved into files. It sounds simple, but why would we want to do that? The most obvious advantage is better SEO, better search engine optimization. The content is already available on the initial request, unlike with traditional single-page applications, so the bots can find and read this content. It's also important for social media bots, because social media bots typically cannot read JavaScript and especially cannot read dynamically generated metadata. Then there's performance gain on initial load, since everything is already pre-cached, pre-generated. Additionally, Gridsome comes with special optimizations that we'll discuss later. Other benefits are for hosting and for scaling. It's very easy to host such a website on pretty much any server or even on a CDN. And if we use continuous integration, we can additionally ease the build and upload process. Finally, why would we use static site generator that is based on JavaScript? Because there are many static site generators written for typically backend languages with typically backend frameworks. So since we're using JavaScript for everything, we can also take advantage of some special features typical only to front-end applications. One of them is hot module replacement, which is very handy during the development process. Also, after the initial loading, after the initial load, our website once again becomes a single-page application. And once it's already loaded, so we don't lose the traditional single-page application advantages either. Such a stack is recently popular as Jam stack, and Jam is tasty, so I like it a lot. How it works under the hood. We see the first one, the data sources. We can connect to CMSs through plugins, to some local files, be it Markdown files, JSON files, or any other type of files provided by a plugin, or different kinds of APIs. Then we grab the data through GraphQL queries on our page and template components, which we'll talk in a moment. During the development phase, we have access to hot module reload and all other goodies coming with Vue.js out of the box. Finally, there's the build time, and we have HTML and JSON files with the content based on our components. We can automate this process using continuous integration tools. They often come already built to static hosting services such as Netlify. So usually, in such case, we don't have to set up a CI by ourselves. By default, Gridsome makes the page also a progressive web application, so it's easy to use on mobile. We had a talk about Nuxt today, and Alex was bragging that we can use Nuxt for many kinds of applications, for single-page applications, for server-side rendering, and also to generate static websites, because it's possible with Nuxt. And even myself, I could use Nuxt in many use cases when I want to create a static page. Especially if the static page is a part of a bigger system. If I have micro framework architecture, if some parts of the system are using more dynamic content, then I would probably generate write all the parts of the stack in Nuxt. But Gridsome is also a very good tool, especially when we have rarely changing content like blocks or landing pages, and especially if we want to manage data by GraphQL. That's, in this case, Gridsome is a no-brainer, and we can just have fun with it. So let's take a look at standard CLI commands with Gridsome. Create command, we can scaffold a new project, and then Gridsome develop will allow us to run development servers in which we can use hot module reload and anything else we need. Finally, if we want to build the files for production Then we run the Gridsome build, and it's done. At this point, if we have the continuous integration, our files should be automatically uploaded to the repository on GitHub or GitLab. And this step will trigger the upload to our hosting solutions such as Netlify. We used Vue CLI, so we have our application, our project scaffolded. What is inside? A bunch of files, and I divided them into two groups. Here we can see the highlighted configuration files. Gridsome config.js is where we keep the configuration of our plugins. They may be plugins providing, for example, an integration with specific CMS, or a handler for a file type such as Markdown. So if we want to use data coming from Markdown files, we would use Markdown plugin and configure it in this file. Gridsome server.js is less often used. It's a more advanced use case. If you want to hook into some internals of Gridsome to change how Gridsome works under the hood, then we will write such code in this file. But what interests us more are the component files. We can see three different folders: layout folder, pages folder, and templates folder. The layouts are pretty self-descriptive, and Alex already explained us the concept during his Next talk. Same with pages component. Just like in Next, each of them will automatically be injected into Vue router setup under the hood, so we don't have to deal with any router configuration, which is one of my favorite things about frameworks on top of Vue.js, because I don't really like working with Vue router out of the box. Finally, we have template components, which provide views for individual records coming from GraphQL or other data source. So if we, for example, have a blog, then the list of posts would be covered in the page component, but individual post would be covered by a template component. Here's the template part of page component. We will download all our stories from API and display them. Don't worry about the Edge and the Node. They are not a Gridsome feature. They are coming from GraphQL. And there will be a talk about GraphQL later during the day. So if you want to know more about it, just come to the GraphQL talk. We can grab our content using the $page property and display it on the screen. In our case, we are using the ID, the title, and the synopsis. In our GraphQL, we will have our ID, title, and synopsis. We will choose which exact fields we want from our stories. But those of you who know Vue.js could wonder from where the page query showed up. It's a custom block inside of a Vue file. Typically, there are three parts: the script part, the template part, and the style part used for CSS. But using Webpack, thanks to a VLoader plugin, we can create our custom blocks like that. I typically use a custom docs block, which I use for documentation of my components, while Gridsome uses such a block to handle GraphQL queries. We can also use pagination and other enhancements here. Similar situation with template components. We grab individual item of data and display it on the screen. The main difference here between pages and template in our code is that we passed the ID of the data that we want to upload. Notice that even in the case of templates, we are still using our layout component. So if we have our layout that should be wrapped, that should wrap our content from templates on pages, we have to use the layout in both templates and pages components. And that's practically enough for the basic explanations. There's no really big secret behind it. As long as we know the basics of Vue.js, basics of GraphQL, Gridsome is pretty easy to use with little practice. But we cannot have our blog or landing page without properly handled metadata. Gridsome provides us with a custom component option called metainfo. Under the hood, it uses ViewMeta package maintained by the Nux team, and we can fill each metadata field with static data or grab it from GraphQL dynamically. Gridsome comes with several performance optimizations, but we don't have much time left, so let's just show the slides. This here is glink, which will use lazy loading and prefetching, which are pretty popular optimizations for performance, and gimage, which is using 3 different strategies to provide optimizations for progressive images. I promised to be quick, and I'm already behind the time, but if you want to know more, Gift is a big fan of Gridsome and writes pretty good tutorials. You can find them on Scotch.io. And thank you for coming, obrigado. Give Gridsome a try in a small project. You never know when it can come handy. Follow me on Twitter, join us on official Vue.js chat, and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you. I have no idea how it works. Found it. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for your talk. How does Gridsome compares with VuePress, the latest Vue static site generator?
Okay, with VuePress is a tool in Vue.js ecosystem maintained by the core team, but right now VuePress is the use case for VuePress is pretty much limited to documentation. In the new version of VuePress, we'll be able to create landing pages, to create blocks, and the main difference, because you asked for differences, main difference would be that VuePress doesn't come with as many data sources, mostly Markdown. But what VuePress comes with is a pretty handy system of themes for templating. So it's also a tool that I recommend to use, but mainly for documentation at this point. I see the next speaker is much more popular, but thank you for coming.